Am I good?
Yep.
Okay, this is Mr. Courtney. This is my den. This is fractions. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. That is my dog under the table. This is weird, but let's do it. Here we go. All right, we already know how to estimate fractions. For example, Mr. Courtney has 8 1/5 cookies, and he subtracts 3 3/4 cookies. He doesn't just worry about the little pieces. Okay? So he's going to estimate that to 8 because 1/5 is really close to 0. Then he's going to estimate 3 3/4 to 4. And that's because 3/4, as we know, is really close to a whole. So far, so good. Love it. So 8 minus 4 gives me 4. That would be a really nice estimate. We've done it. It's easy. No problem. What about if I give you something a little bit more complicated, right? What if I have 5 plus 21.5 plus 3.5? So as we know with halves, we can kind of take those halves into consideration. So 2 halves, for example, makes 1 whole. And then I can use the commutative property to add it up in a bunch of cool ways. 5 plus 21 is 26. I add that 1. I add that 3. I kind of like this now. It's cool because there's no Roman like hanging on the computer card. It's kind of fun. I like this. It's cool. So 26 plus 1 plus 3 is about 30. And don't forget your squiggly line because that's not an actual amount. In this case, it is though. Surprise. But what if I give you something like this? So we were looking at this before all this madness happened. What if I give you a fraction of a whole amount? Or what if I give you something super complicated, right? What do we do with that? Okay, we know how to solve it. We solved it before we left on the break. But again, we can't just be solving stuff without knowing what's up. So let's give it a try. So we know that Ms. Runfar told us about equal but different. So what does that mean? So let's take a look at fractions of a whole. So Mr. Courtney steals a bunch of Girl Scout cookies, right? Good. My son's laughing, so this means I'm doing good. Okay, so Mr. Courtney steals a bunch of Girl Scout cookies, and let's say that in this box of Girl Scout cookies, there are 20 Girl Scout cookies, right? So what does it mean if I do a fraction of all those Girl Scout cookies? But what does it also mean if I take all those Girl Scout cookies first? What's the difference? Well, let's take a look at the first one. So the first one is I've got 1/5 of 20. So first I have to find out what the whole is. This is the whole box. So I'm going to draw the whole box. Inside of that whole box happens to be 20 delicious Girl Scout cookies. So if Mr. Courtney takes 1/5 of it, remember that multiplication is groups of. Say it with me, groups of. So if I take 1/5 of 20, I could show that, as I taught you in class, by simply drawing 5 groups, thinking about what goes in each, and that way I could find 1/5 of all of those. And I'm sure you can all figure out that that would be 4. Why? Because 4 is the only number that I can multiply by 5 to get back to 20. Okay, so we've got a really nice estimate, but we don't have to get super crazy like that. We can just know that 1/5 is really close to 0. And a little small amount of 20 is going to be a very tiny amount. So even if I didn't know it was 4, I might be thinking it's 2. I might be thinking it's 3. I might even go up as high as 5. Any of those would make a really nice estimate. Well, what about this one? This one's different, right? How does it mean to say I have 20 groups of 1/5? Get away from the Girl Scout cookies, Oreo. They're not for you. Now, but what does it mean if I have 20 groups of 1/5? See, this time it's a little different. So you have to imagine, if I open this, Nora's going to kill me, so I can't. So you have to imagine that I have 1/5 of a little Girl Scout cookie. Okay, 1/5. If I open this, I'm dead meat. Okay, 1/5 of a little Girl Scout cookie. So let's draw that. I have 1/5 of a little Girl Scout cookie. There it is. Right? And you have to imagine that I do that 20 times, which you can imagine because Mr. Courtney would do that. I would take like a little Girl Scout cookie, I'd nibble it, and and then I'd nibble another one, and then I'd nibble another one, and then I'd nibble another one, and I'd do it 20 times until I got caught. And then when I got caught, I would stop. But by that time, the damage is done. I've got 20 groups of 1/5. Well, if I put my 1/5s together, strangely, you'll notice that it takes 5/5 to make one whole. So if I make another 5/5, ooh, now I've eaten 2 whole cookies. But what if I have, that? And there I go, I'm still nibbling all my little pieces, 5/5, 5/5, 5/5. As we know in class, 5/5 is 1 whole, so I've got 1 whole, 1 whole, 1 whole, 1 whole, and I should eat about 4 whole cookies. Of course, nobody knows that, because all I've been doing is nibbling on each cookie and then putting them back in the box before anybody can see, because I don't want to get in trouble. Now, but how could I estimate that if I can't get all crazy on the modeling? Easy. I can just think to myself, I have 20 groups of something that's really close to 0, okay? So I mean, what if I gave you a little tiny amount of something and I gave it to you 20 times? You're not going to have a lot. So again, I might still estimate only 1 or 2 or 3, okay? And that is how we can estimate fractions of a whole. We can go back to that 0, 1/2, 1, and ask ourselves, how much of that whole group am I getting? Or we can ask ourselves, I've got a bunch of those groups, but how big is that group? So let's try one more and then we'll wrap up this video for today. So, for example, what if I gave you 3/4 of 100? Okay, I give you a $100 bill, but I say I'm only going to give you 3/4 of that amount. Well, you might say, okay, well, that's almost a whole, but not quite, so you might estimate it to 80. And of course, some of you out there, you little math brainiacs, are thinking it's exactly 75, which is wonderful. But as long as you can at least think this is less than all that by a little bit, so I'm going to guess a little lower, you're doing great for today, okay? All right, but what if I said something different? What if I said, well, I'm going to give you 100 groups of 3/4 cookies. Now, this may seem strange to you, but if you're, I don't know, Enrique, it probably makes a lot of sense. You might have 3/4 of pan dulces lying around your house, right? Like you have like 3/4 of conchas, right? And I give you 100 of those. You're going to have to put them all together. Now, you're not going to wind up with 100 conchas, okay? You're going to wind up with less, but not by a lot, because that's almost a whole concha every time. So you're going to get maybe 75 again, or maybe 80, or maybe you guess 85. Again, doesn't matter if you're perfect today. What are we trying to do? We're trying to hit that bullseye, okay? As long as we're on here, we're close with an answer, we're doing great. That's your first video for today. I'd like to summarize by saying I did not eat the Girl Scout cookies. If they had been eaten, it clearly would have been because of my dog. I'll see you in the next video.